these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office, experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all, in-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
We're ready to go. Okay, greatest podcast ever. I'm sure everybody's very thankful to get to be on the greatest podcast ever. And we're here at, as you can see, this big sign behind us, the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26. We are the lonely Republicans here, and we're leaving tomorrow morning. Garret, as our leader, maybe Garret Graves from Louisiana, which is, people who are very jealous of Texas. And as someone who is very jealous of Texas, being from Louisiana, but also very concerned about more rational approach to environmentalism the way I am. Well, give me some takeaways here.
First, for the record, I want to be clear: we've never lost to the Astros. I just want to get that out there.
Not even in the game.
No, look, Dan. I think something that's important to keep in mind. This is the 26th COP Convention of Parties, and we're still having global emissions going up. I mean, that is the biggest failure of an organization ever. And you come to places like this, and people often look down in the United States or demonize us in terms of our environmental credentials or records. Whenever the reality is, the truth is, it is the United States that has led the world in reducing emissions. We've reduced emissions more than the next 12 emissions-reducing countries combined, number one. Number two, this is a global issue. Yeah. And as you know, we've got to reduce emissions globally if we're going to make progress. For every 1 ton of emissions the United States has reduced, 10 tons have gone up by other countries, 4 of those by China. So let me say it again. For every 1 ton we've reduced, China's gone up by 4. The rest of the world's gone up by 10. This doesn't make sense.
And it's important to know, why has America reduced emissions?
We've reduced emissions because of our transition to natural gas, to cleaner natural gas. And as you know, both of our states, and I'm sure Louisiana's doing better at it, but both of our states, we have this ability, as we've been talking about, to be able to do carbon capture and storage to where you can effectively make natural gas as clean as the cleanest energy source in the world with no emissions.
Yeah. John from Utah, Marianne Miller-Meeks from Iowa. Let me start with you ladies first, please. Takeaways.
Well, I think what's really interesting to me being here is how much emphasis there is on climate change and decarbonization in Europe, in Great Britain, as compared to the United States. And I think that we have a conservative policy going forward. What I mean by that is an all-above strategy. So Iowa, we've reduced our energy production in Iowa is 50% from renewables. So we have ethanol, biodiesel, biomass, wind, solar. So all of those above. We did have a nuclear power plant which closed down. So we're very interested in making the planet cleaner, safer, healthier. But we're interested in doing that in a way that doesn't, number one, hamper our economy, hamper us from growing our economy and competing globally, and also that holds emitters, as we heard from the Undersecretary yesterday, holds the worst emitters responsible, and that means China.
One of the things that fascinated me, because we had a very confrontational interview with the Washington Post just not too long ago, and one thing she said stood out. It's just cost. I mean, you guys keep complaining about cost. That's just a financing problem. And I'm like, what do you think the economy is? The economy is not just a bill that the government pays. That's not what the economy is. The economy is a description of the interactions between human beings. It's a description of livelihoods. It's a measurement of that. And to just dismiss it like it doesn't matter, like that's not a factor when you're trying to talk about solutions is absolutely insane.
Can I weigh in on that? Because
no. Anyway, okay, go ahead.
John from Utah. We've never lost to the Astros.
Wow, you guys are just.
So listen, this thing about cost is crazy, right? Like, we have to go spend trillions of dollars, and nobody is asking about outcomes, right? This is all measured on how much we spend.
Yeah.
And so, listen, Republicans want to talk about outcomes. If that costs money, we'll have that discussion. But the reality of it is the good conservative principles we came here to talk about would save the U.S. money, would build jobs, keep jobs in the United States, build our economy. And somehow we've got to get that message out. It's not about spending money. It's about results.
Okay, so speaking of some solutions, I mean, we're as Republicans, we tend to center on nuclear energy, carbon capture technology, and I think the reason we do that is because we're talking about reliable sources of energy. I thought it was interesting. We got a tour of how Scotland does its thing, but it's largely wind power, and that's great. But then you ask them what happens when it's not windy. Well, we just import it. And that's going to be the plan basically forever. So it might work well for Scotland and with their mix. I don't think that could possibly work in the United States. We can't just import energy. What are your thoughts? I'm not even sure I've come to a conclusion on this. Does nuclear have an important enough role here at COP26?
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's good that people are starting to talk about it, but it's clear it's not enough. Right. I don't know any way that you get from where we are today to where everybody here wants to go without nuclear being in the picture.
And looking at solutions to drive down those costs. I mean, look, on the American left, they're fully against nuclear. And I would say moderate Democrats on ENC, we are members of it. They kind of talk about both sides of their mouth on it. Like they give lip service to nuclear, but they won't do what it takes to get the cost down where it needs to be competitive.
Look, you've got a perfect playbook right now on nuclear. Nuclear is about 20% of America's electricity today. It is an emissions-free energy source. And folks, unfortunately, looking back at Chernobyl, what happened in Japan, is that being today's nuclear, and it's not. We are doing incredible research. We've developed advanced nuclear technologies, small modular reactors, and other technologies to where the nuclear proliferation is not an issue, the waste isn't an issue. You can deploy these things in years, not in decades. So the future of nuclear is very bright. The ironic thing is that when you look at states like California or New York that have gone in and either decommissioned or beginning to decommission, they're converting to dirtier energy sources. When California shut down the nuclear power plant, they sent out a letter the next day asking if they can increase their emissions beyond their permit because they're going back to dirtier energy sources. So if shame on us if we follow these playbooks like California, you have greater emissions, you have higher costs, you have less reliance on your reliable energy sources, and you're the most dependent state on foreign energy. Why in the world would we follow that model, whereas following the model that our states have done where you can reduce global emissions by exporting our clean natural gas, supplanting Vladimir Putin's dirtier gas, while providing economic activity for our states? I mean, these solutions make sense.
And the fact is, we will reduce nuclear in half at the very same time Joe Biden wants to reduce emissions in half.
And Iowa's an exporter of energy. So just like Texas and Louisiana, I'm going to throw Iowa into a mix. So we're an exporter of energy. And I think it's important to recognize California is an importer of energy. So their solutions focused on wind and solar, maybe some hydro, have left them with higher prices and rolling blackouts. And we don't think that that's something that the American people want. They want consistent, reliable energy to meet their demand for electricity. And how do we get there? It's through a strategy that encompasses all of the assets that is, it is independent or agnostic of the industry from which it comes.
Right. I mean, the source shouldn't matter. The reason carbon emissions are reduced shouldn't matter. And I think that's your first indication that we feel a lot of the conversations around climate change activism just aren't serious, because it's very outcome-based. It's like this glorifying, this sort of the deification, as I call it, of solar and wind energy only. And it just doesn't get you where you need to be. And it's a very dangerous thought process, because it's counterproductive. It won't get us where we need to be. And the cost in the economy and our energy independence, or our ability to heat our homes in a very basic way, is severely threatened. And that fact is just not acknowledged. I mean, it's why they dismiss. I mean, if they're not too excited about nuclear, they're definitely not excited about carbon capture, because it allows you to keep burning fossil fuels. But it's like, if you have a net zero emissions from this process, why are you against it? And they can't answer that. They can't answer it.
Well, when you've asked, it's basically because it's being extracted from the ground. So they're against anything that's extracted from the ground. But yet, they have no problem with the extraction of rare earth elements, lithium, or other metals extracted from the ground to make solar panels or to make batteries.
As long as it's in China. They do have a problem with it in the United States. As long as it's in China, they're happy with it. They love creating green jobs in China. I think that's what the Green New Deal is really about.
It's interesting, as Congresswoman Miller-Meeks just mentioned. Here you have folks that are putting the bullseye or the target on an energy source, on conventional fuels, rather than on emissions. There's no science that says it's the fuels, it's the emissions. And if, as Dan just said, if you have solutions to the emissions problem, why do you have a problem with the fuel source, especially when it's something that's so abundant in the United States? President Obama was here talking about congressional Republicans being the problem. The ironic thing is that whenever he put his Clean Power Plan in place, he said he wanted to have a 32% reduction by 2030 in emissions, yet it's Republicans that, as a result of the innovation and a result of the flexibility, not saying your only tools are wind and solar, but by putting everything on the table, we actually achieved that goal that he had set for 2030. We hit it in 2019 and even exceeded it. Once again, proving the free market solutions and allowing all of the different tools on the table are a more successful and more affordable solution.
By the way, do you remember that celebration in 2019? Because I don't.
I think, Obama called us anti-science. I think Obama's anti-science when it comes to this discussion. And I think that's going to be the name of the podcast episode. Obama's anti-science. What else should we cover? What are we missing? Takeaways?
Carbon capture, carbon sequestration, what's happening, very exciting things happening in Iowa. And so for those that are in the petroleum, liquid, and natural gas industry, so we're actually coupling, carbon dioxide is, one of the byproducts of ethanol production. So capturing that carbon dioxide, piping it through, the technology that comes out of Texas and Louisiana with pipelines up into North Dakota underground where it doesn't seep forward into the environment. So a different type of carbon sequestration to make ethanol even more carbon neutral, and that helps all of our industries.
Yeah, that was something we had a panel of experts talk about, was because a common talking point on the left on this is the carbon capture technology that's 20, 30 years out. It's not really real. And we had a lot of experts say, look, that's just not true. They're actually commercializing, we have a plant called Net Zero just outside of Houston, the pilot program. They're commercializing that in Illinois pretty shortly here. Net zero emissions will make a profit. So that technology truly is there. We heard about a company that burns biofuels. It means it burns wood shavings, basically, but then captures that on site. And they would call that net negative, because the calculations they do with it, because it's a biofuel and you're storing all that underground. So again, and also that doesn't turn off when the sun stops shining. An important note, it's and as far as costs go, everything has more costs. Everything has more costs than coal and gas. The question is, where you can allocate your resources, and I think us trying to drive the conversation towards that just solutions-oriented thinking is extremely important, because they also, I think, fall into this fallacy that wind and solar is just really cheap. And it's not. It's just really heavily subsidized, and so it seems cheap. But that's just not exactly the case.
Hey, let's hit three other topics that I think are really good. Number one is kind of talking about, with a 60% projected increase in the global demand for energy, the role of the United States and the role of different energy technologies. Two, making it clear that none of us are opposed to any energy technology, that we support everything. And number three, kind of talking about it from a strategic perspective of, if we continue down this path where the Biden administration is leading us, who's the winner? Who is the winner? Which country? Which military? I think those are three really good topics for us to try and talk about.
Yeah, and China seems to be the winner. Like I said, the Green New Deal is a job creator for China. Like you mentioned before, they produce 90% of the world's solar panels. We have no plans to increase our capacity to build that, as far as I understand it. And again, what are we doing with this? What's our end state?
Well, I'd say not only is China the winner, there is no environmental winner, right? Because you can't get on the Biden plan from where we are to a clean future simply by building more windmills and more solar plants, right? We've got to fall back on U.S. innovation, storage, carbon sequestration, new nuclear, hydrogen. All of those things we've got to double down on those things.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things is, in their modeling, they make assumptions about what particular states will do or what particular energy sources will come about. So I can tell you that there has been so much wind energy proliferation in Iowa that there's now pushback. So as a state senator, we had several bills come up that had to address siting, how close they were to a home or to a farm. So that is there is becoming more pushback as you see more and more wind farms arise. So, and then, have we examined the health effects of wind farms or other types of energy production? And we would be remiss, so I'm going to go backwards a little bit, we would be remiss if we didn't bring up carbon capture as proposed by one of our colleagues, Representative Bruce Westerman from Arkansas, on 100 million trees. So I just wanted to throw that in as another conservative method for carbon capture.
Can I weigh in, too, on a point that she made, and that is there's been some talk amongst us about life cycle cost. And we're really not talking about life cycle cost enough on EVs, right, on windmills. And it's not enough to say they pull this much carbon out of the air. What is the life cycle carbon that we're pulling out of the air on these things?
Great point.
They never do the right analysis. They never analyze it apples to apples. So they always leave out certain factors.
So Dan, I got a trivia question for you, and I've heard you talk about this. I think you know the answer, but which country's leader is taking actions to facilitate the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that allows Russian gas to go into Europe, and which country's leader is actually asking for more energy production, more oil and gas production in Russia, in Venezuela, in Iran, in Nigeria, while telling their own country to stop producing?
Pretty sure, ding, 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 that's Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden.
Can we have China? Can we have Joe Biden for 200?
Who was it made a joke, or who said if we just called the Keystone Pipeline Nord Stream 3, then maybe they'd approve it. I don't know if there's news today also, by the way, that they're thinking of canceling another major pipeline from Western Canada that goes through Michigan. I mean, right before winter time hits, and this is insane. And again, the question is, will this save the world, right? Because, again, let's go back to the confrontational Washington Post reporter. Let me repeat their talking points. Okay, but, and they'll say, isn't any cost worth it if it means saving people's lives? Aren't people going to die? Aren't they just going to drown in the ocean as sea levels rise? And it's like, hold up a second. Actually, follow what the UN climate report says. And it very specifically says, if all developed nations stopped emitting right now, you'd lower the temperature by 2100 by maybe 0.8 degrees Fahrenheit. So you'd almost have no effect. A lot of this is baked in. You have to just acknowledge that fact.
We're on a trajectory.
Yeah, you're on a trajectory. We believe we have an interest in mitigating that by reducing emissions. But to answer her question directly, yes, there is a point where the cost is too high because the benefits are way too low. And you're going to get that same result because of climate change. But you're also going to destroy your economy and society. And I don't think anybody here thinks through that basic analysis.
But Dan, isn't there the human cost as well? And that is by reducing how much electricity is available, with rising demand. If you have a lack of air conditioning with heat waves, if you have a lack of heating when there's a cold or a polar vortex, as you experience, people die from that. So people die from climate extremes that have easily been taken care of by heating and air conditioning as we've become more developed countries.
We've reduced disaster-related deaths in the world 90% in the last 100 years.
And in preventing other nations from developing their energy sources, they don't have electricity, they don't develop their human potential, they don't develop adequate healthcare sources, adequate clean water, food sources. So you're contributing to worsening human conditions in other parts of the world by preventing them from having some reliable source of energy production.
There are examples right here in the United States of exactly what y'all are talking about. Up in the Northeast, they've refused to build pipelines providing for natural gas from Pennsylvania up into the New England area. So what happened? They had a shortage last time we had a severe winter. They had to bring in home heating oil, which had greater emissions. Then it got to the point where it was so bad they actually had to bring in liquefied natural gas from where? From Vladimir Putin. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Putin's on Twitter trolling the United States. They had to bring in Russian natural gas to solve America's energy problem because we refuse to do it ourselves. Look, I'll say it again. Shame on us if we repeat these mistakes that California's made, that they've made up in New England, that you've seen happen in other countries. The current plan plays into the hands of China by giving them the renewable energy market that they've cornered. It plays into the hands of Russia by shutting down domestic energy production, giving that production to Vladimir Putin. They did the same thing in the Obama administration. Every barrel of oil we shut down in the United States, we imported from Russia. This makes no sense. You're sending pink slips to folks in Texas and Louisiana. You're employing and giving money to Vladimir Putin to then challenge us from a military perspective.
Not to say how much cleaner it is produced and manufactured and shipped here in the United States versus coming from overseas.
It doesn't seem like anybody here talks about energy justice. There's a lot of talk about environmental justice, but no energy justice. And there's certainly no introspection. You know, say the fact that Germany's increased their emissions 25% for power production this year because of their version of the Green New Deal, and which created unreliable sources, which means they have to then burn coal and import more natural gas, and there you go. Nobody wants. I don't hear that conversation here very, very often, but what you hear about instead is, we'll look at Scotland, and as we noted, Scotland doesn't have an industry; they don't need a lot of power, and they can import it when they don't have wind. So it's a lot of wishful thinking, which I think frustrates us, and most importantly, cannot be replicated in the United States.
We also saw in Scotland rates that in their minds, if you're spending 10% of your total income on energy, you're in energy poverty. And just imagine in the United States, people paying 10% of their income simply to heat their homes. And that's the path we're going down.
Their prices are far, far higher. And they don't seem to care.
And I think that's a point that Garret has made repeatedly, and that is, we should be agnostic on the source or the technology. What's the goal? Cleaner, healthier planet, but meeting the energy demands that we have. What has happened in Scotland works for Scotland, but it's not going to work for Texas, or Louisiana, or Iowa, or Utah, or other places around the United States. And are the American people willing to accept higher priced energy with more volatility and the potential for blackouts?
The answer is overwhelmingly no.
Technology neutrality, which is what has allowed us to be the global leader in reducing emissions, and we've got to stick to that strategy. I'll say it again. You're going to see a 60% increase in global energy demand over the next 30 years. These developing countries will never take on these more expensive energy solutions if that's all that's offered to them. What they're going to do is they're going to go to whatever's cheapest, and that is oftentimes going to be something that is much dirtier. We've got to be thoughtful about the clean energy future, thinking not just about the energy demands today, but about the growth in energy demand in the future. And that's why shutting out some of the U.S. energy production, which is the cleanest in the world in many cases, particularly in our offshore areas, it doesn't make sense.
And another thing that's never brought up, maybe we'll end with this. I don't know how much time we got left. We gotta go to dinner. They lead us around like crazy this trip. But it's a little easier to talk about innovative solutions, new technologies in places like the U.S. and Scotland and in Europe. A little bit harder to talk about that from a reasonable perspective in developing nations, and all the emissions from the future are pretty much coming from developing nations as they industrialize, and of course China. I've advocated, I'm sure everybody here does, long advocated that let's live in reality. Again, we can write a fiction novel about putting solar panels on mud huts in Africa. It'll be a great fiction novel, but it'll never be real. So exporting more of our natural gas probably would have a larger impact on reducing emissions than most of the kind of high-minded solar wind solutions that are advocated for here. And I just do some back-of-the-napkin math on China. They emit about 30% of global emissions. Our energy agencies, I think EPA did this estimate, where if you just replaced all their coal plants with natural gas plants, you'd reduce their emissions by about 50%, which means 15% of global emissions. I'm not aware of any other solution that has that kind of impact.
By the way, it's more than the Green New Deal.
Well, yeah, a lot more.
Yeah.
A lot more. Natural gas would seem to at least have, I would say, the primary role in reducing emissions for the next at least 50 years for developing nations. I'm not sure I see another. I'm not sure I see another counterpoint to that that's very feasible.
And I think what we heard when we were here was that China is, developing and building coal-fired plants in underdeveloped countries as a source of energy. And so it's another reason why the United States really needs to take a greater role in this, and then a greater role in setting standards, which we've talked about, some type of accounting standards and methodology that goes, to Garrett's point, to emissions, especially if there's any consideration of a cross-border tax or tariff.
Let me bring that up real quick. I mean, that was an interesting part of the conversation, and it's potentially a place where Republicans and Democrats could agree. I think there's a lot more details to flesh out. But this idea of, because I've always been against a carbon tax, but I've said, if you're going to have a carbon tax, there should be a carbon tax on China. So that what that really boils down to is a tariff on Chinese goods that are carbon intensive. The question is how you measure that and how you get the global community to get together. You would think that, again, if you want to reduce emissions wildly, you would think that'd be the number one conversation in this place.
Well, it goes back to this concept that this administration has, where they're ignoring the fact that the United States already has one of the most efficient energy economies in the world, meaning if we make something in the United States, it's going to have less carbon emissions associated with building it in the United States. But what we do is we refuse to acknowledge that. Therefore, we end up having these things manufactured in China that result in greater global emissions, and it results in greater trade deficit and a loss of jobs in the United States. These strategies make no sense from an economic competitiveness perspective, from an environmental perspective on emissions, certainly from economic activity. It is amazing that you're seeing a doubling and tripling down on these strategies that have proven to fail on price, on environment, and on economic activity in the United States.
Any last thoughts? I think that was pretty good.
We thank you.
Thanks guys for doing it. Thanks for coming on Hold These Truths, one of the greatest podcasts ever recorded.
The greatest.
Appreciate you.
We're
all very
glad to
much.
be on the greatest
Marianne
podcast.
Miller-Meeks from Iowa, John Curtis from Utah, Garret Graves from the foreign country of Louisiana. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
We're now all famous.